Hey guys, and welcome back to the Introduction to Kubernetes for Complete Beginners course. In this video, we're going to talk about Docker files and how to create them. Basically, a Docker file is a file that contains a list of instructions that are needed to build your Docker image. And a Docker image is what you take to build your Docker container. So you can see I have my browser pulled up here, and this is the Dockerfile reference guide. Basically, this is a guide that contains a list of commands that you can specify inside of your Docker file. So let's go ahead and test creating our first Docker file. You see I'm in an empty directory here in my terminal. Oh wait, no I'm not. Give me just a second. Now we're in an empty directory. So I want to go ahead and touch my Docker file. And your Docker file will always have a capital D like this, and it'll be called Dockerfile. Usually that's the standard. I recommend following the standard, so always do the capital D. So we'll create that file. Now I'll open my editor and edit this file. Alright, so the first instruction that you almost always want to have in your Docker file is going to be from, like this. And also it's worth mentioning all the commands or instructions that go inside of a Docker file, they will always be in all caps like this. So if we look back here at the reference guide and we go to from, it explains the syntax and how to use from, and basically what from does, it's you put from to select the operating system you want to base your image on. So say if we were building a Windows container, we would say from, a particular version of Windows, or if we wanted to base it on Ubuntu Linux, we could say from Ubuntu Linux like this, or just from Ubuntu. But in our case, we're going to do from Alpine. And let me open up the Alpine Linux page for you. So I always recommend building very simple container images with Alpine Linux. Alpine Linux is extremely small, simple, and lightweight. And also the website, as you can see, is www.alpinelinux.org. Having a extremely small container image is going to help your container boot up faster. Alpine Linux containers Alpine Linux base images are about 4.4 megabytes, whereas an Ubuntu base image might be around like 400 or 500 megabytes. So the smaller the image, the faster your container will boot up. And Alpine Linux is very simple, and it's not bloated with a bunch of libraries you don't need. So anyways, with that said, let's go ahead and move back to our Docker file. So our first instruction would be from Alpine Linux. And the next one is going to be cmd. And if we take a look at the Docker reference guide, here's the syntax, the various ways you can specify arguments to cmd. And essentially cmd is just a command that you want your Docker container to run, and this will be built into your Docker image. So for the sake of this test, we're going to do something very simple. If you're familiar with the echo command, it just outputs text to the standard out or the terminal. So we'll do our command echo hello world. Close the quotes. We'll save this and we'll quit. And now how you build your Docker image from your Docker file, the command you want to use is docker build, and you have to specify the location where your Docker file is. In this case, it's just here in our current working directory, so just dot. So we run this command, docker build. Alright, and let's examine this output we get here. You see there are steps listed here, And the first step is it's running the first command within our Dockerfile, which is from Alpine. And normally what this will do on systems where you don't already have the Alpine base Docker image installed on your computer, this step will be very long, and this step here will be very long, and it will download, it'll start the download process of Alpine Linux and what's necessary to run this base image. But since it's already on my computer, this step was very short, took less than a second. The next step is the command echo hello world, and so it went ahead and added that into the next layer of our Docker image, and then this resulted in a successful build, and this right here is our container ID. So if we want to run our container, we can do docker run, and we'll just copy this container ID. And look at that, it said hello world and then it exited. So at this point, it's worth noting, we ran our Docker container. It ran for just less than a second, and then it died and went away. And this is because a Docker container only has a life cycle that is just the length of the process running inside of it. Docker containers are meant to run usually one process or one service, and the life cycle is based around the life of that process. So if your process dies, the container dies and goes away. So we'll play with that here in just a moment. So say we wanted to run a script or copy a script into our Docker container. There's a great command for that called copy, and we'll go to that here in the reference manual. And what this does, this command allows you to copy files from your local machine into the container image. So I will give you a demonstration of how that works here. Let's create a file, test.sh. And this is just going to be a simple shell script. And we'll just say echo hello world from a script inside a container. All right, and this is an important step. As you all know, if you're used to creating shell scripts in Linux, you'll need to add the executable flag to your script so you can run it. We'll test this script here in the shell, make sure it works. All right, great. So our script says hello world from a script inside of a container. However, this script is not in a container yet. So let's go ahead and edit our Docker file and build a new image with the script inside of it. So here's what we can do. We can say copy test.sh to test.sh. And so I want to explain this command. This first part where it's test.sh, this is the relative path on your local file system of where the file is. And since our Docker file and this script are in the same directory, I'm not specifying a full path. So just note that. And then the second argument here is the path where the script will live inside the container. And as you can see, I'm putting it at /test.sh, so it's going to be in the root level of the file system in the container. This is usually a good practice when you're building containers that are only going to be running one process. So now let's go ahead and change our command to just call test.sh. We'll save that. And what our command is going to do here now, it should just execute the script that lives inside of our container once we build this image. So now we'll do docker build dot. All right, and it built our Docker image successfully, or container image, whatever you would like to call it. So once again, if we analyze the output here, we have one of 3 steps. The first one was pull down the base image of the operating system our image is going to be based on. The second step was to copy our script, test.sh to test.sh inside of the image. And our third step is to run the script. And you can see it was built successfully, and this is the new image build ID here. So we'll copy that, and let's try running our container. Let's try building a container on this image we just created. So we'll do docker run container, or excuse me, image ID, and look at that. I know this doesn't look like a lot, but this script was copied inside of our container image, and then we built a container on that image, ran it, and it outputted hello world from a script inside of a container. So I know this is not a very useful container image or a container. So let's try doing a process that will not exit immediately, so you can see a little more how the container lifecycle works. So let's try having our container maybe run the top command. And if you're not familiar with top is it's a tool on Linux to basically show the running processes. As you can see here, I'm running it now on my local machine. So let's go ahead and edit our Dockerfile again. Let's see if we can add another command and just call it top. So in theory, our Docker image should follow these steps. It'll pull from the Alpine Linux distribution base image. It will copy our script. It will execute our script. Then it will run the command top. And hopefully top is available inside the Alpine base image. Let's test this. So we'll do a Docker build again. All right, and our container was built successfully. It was very fast. We'll copy our new image ID. I'm sorry, our image was built successfully. So we'll do a Docker run image ID. Look at that. And it's running top from inside of our container. And so this container, this is what we're looking at here. This is the output of a container. Let me open a new tab here. If we do a Docker PS, we can see that our container is running, and the command here is top. And Docker PS is just shows you you're running containers on your local machine. There are many other Docker commands that are available to control the containers that you're running, but right now we'll just focus on Docker PS, and then when we're ready to kill this container here, we could do Docker kill. So let me show you that. Do Docker PS to get the container ID. We'll do Docker kill. All right, that should have killed it. And if we look at our other tab here, the top command should be finished running. And it has. So like that was how easy it was to build our first Dockerfile, and then from our Dockerfile, build an actual running container. And if we look at this again, our Dockerfile is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just 6 lines. It's that easy. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and in some of the future videos we'll create more advanced Docker files to build more advanced containers that actually serve a real purpose. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed. Please tune in to the next video. Thank you and bye-bye. Hey guys, welcome back to the Introduction to Kubernetes for Complete Beginners course. Last video we learned a little bit about creating Docker files and took maybe discussed Docker Hub a little bit. In this video I would like to share with you guys how to create a Docker container with a more advanced application. So let's go ahead and get started how you can container maybe your own running application. So with that said, you can see here I have the Dockerfile reference manual pulled up, and let's take a look at GitHub. I found this pretty simple weather application available on GitHub. I will include the link to download this GitHub project in the course material. But let's go ahead and check out this repo and take a look at what it does. Oh, actually, look, here's a GIF of what it does. You simply open your browser, it asks you to put in a city, and it tells you the temperature of the city. So let's go ahead and check that guy out using Git. So simply clone this repo into your current working directory. Now we have this simple Node.js weather app directory. Let's cd into it. Alright, and so this weather app is going to use API calls to openweathermap.org. I already created an account here, but if you would like to follow along with this lesson, I would recommend you browse to this website and go ahead and create yourself a simple account. All they need is your email address, and what this will do, it will give you access to their API, which allows you to make calls about the weather. It's not entirely necessary for you to follow along. I just wanted to show you guys how you can containerize an application that's already been developed. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. I already have an API key, I believe. Let me go ahead and sign in. I'm already signed in. My API keys. You can see I have an API key here called default. And if we actually look at the code for this application, oops, it's very simple. It just needs the API key here, and what it does from there is it makes a query to the API with whatever city you enter into the form, and then it does a request to the API. All that's happening down here. It does a post request, and then it returns the output. So here, let me go ahead and enter my API key in here, and we can test this application locally on my machine. Whoops. Make sure I copy my API key correctly. Okay, save. Alright, and let's test running this application. You can execute this application with node server.js. Alright, it says the example app is listening on port 3000. We browse to that. You see it here. I already have it pulled up, but we'll do a refresh. And you see the last city I searched was Budapest. Let's get the weather for Denver. 54, 59. Let's say Los Angeles. Cool. So this is the application running from my local machine. Now let's follow the steps that we learned in the last video and create a Docker container from this Node application. So let's just Control C this, and we'll cd back into my working directory. So let's go ahead and create our Docker file again, and we'll start with the from, if you remember from the last video, and which base image to choose. That is the question here. So this is a perfect time for me to share with you guys about Docker Hub. Let's take a look. So Docker Hub, once again, is the repository. It's a public repository for people to upload Docker base images that already have a lot of applications installed or are running a specific configuration. It's very similar to the GitHub of the Docker world. It's there's plenty of open source repositories, and you're able to upload yours as well. Unfortunately, in this course, we won't cover uploading to Docker Hub, but right now we'll learn how to search through it. So since we want to deploy our Node application, we want to find a Docker base image that already has Node installed. So if we do a search here, the first result is the official Node Docker image. You see it has 6.6 thousand stars. It's very popular, and 10 million plus pools. And a pool is when someone downloads it. And so if we click on it here, we can see the documentation. Here's how to pull this particular base image into your repository. Your local repository is doing a Docker pull node. And there's some more documentation about the versions of Node you get inside of the container you create from this base image. I would recommend, if you have an opportunity to browse this page, you should take a look at some of this documentation. And something that's worth noting here is you can get a Node Docker base image that are based on different distributions of Linux. If you recall properly, in our last lesson, we used Alpine Linux because it's super lightweight. So let's go ahead and use Alpine Linux here. There's actually a Node official Dockerfile that's built on top of Alpine Linux. Let's take a look at that quickly. And so here's that Dockerfile. We're not going to recreate this whole process. What we're simply going to do is pull from this pre-built Docker image for Node and Alpine. But if you look, this is the process they go through to build this base image for us. So they saved us all this work. Essentially, they're adding user groups, and then they're adding libraries for compiling packages. They're adding some GPG keys. And then they're installing Node and building it and compiling Node and whatnot. So yeah, you see how long this is, like 70 or 61 lines of code here. We're able to skip all this by simply including this in, or calling this base image in our Docker file. And we'll do that like this: Node Alpine. So that saves us all these steps here, which is cool. That's the cool thing about the layering system of building containers. So great. Now, if you remember the copy command from our last lesson, where we copy files from our local file system into the Docker build image. So here, let's copy some of the files that were in that Git repo. So essentially, we're gonna want all the files here. I just did an ls of that repo here. So we have the package.json file that will tell Node which packages to install. We have this public directory, we have the readme, and then we have the actual app, which is the server.js, and a directory called views. So let's just copy the entire directory into our image. So we'll do we'll do copy. We'll copy the entire directory, and we'll copy it to the root of the directory. So we'll do it like this. So this GitHub repository, all the files inside of it, will be copied to at the root level file system of our build image, which is /. All right, and so now once that's done, we want to do a command. And if you recall, if we go back to our Dockerfile reference guide, not command, that's not what we want. We want run. So this is something we didn't cover too much, I believe, in our last video. Run is essentially, it runs a shell command inside of your build image, but the way this works, it runs the command, and whatever happens to the container that is being built after that command is I'm sorry, excuse me. This is when you run this command, you're essentially creating a layer of the Docker container build image that has the results of whatever this command did. For example, when we looked at the Dockerfile for Alpine Linux, you see they do a run here where they set up user groups and then they install some packages. So what happens is these commands get ran, and then an image is created from the file system after these commands get ran. So essentially, what we want to do here is we want to make sure Node installs all our requirements, and the command to do that is usually npm install. So we'll say run npm install. Now we'll call a command, and a command is kind of the command, or the command calls a process that your Docker container is going to be your Docker container's lifecycle. And so for that, we'd want to run the application, the Node application, which is just server.js. So we'll try it like that. All right, so this looks pretty simple. Let's try to build this. Something we forgot to do, and another command we haven't seen yet. So let's go back to our Docker file reference guide, and this is expose. Expose is an instruction that informs the Docker container to listen on a specific port. So say if you have a Docker container that's running a web application and you need to connect to it from outside of the container, either from your local machine or from another container, what you can do is called exposing a port. And this works for TCP ports and UDP ports, as you see in the examples here. So what we want to do here is this simple weather application is going to listen on port 3000. So we'll want to expose 3000. So we do it like that. I'll let it know it's TCP. All right, this looks good. We'll save it, quit. Now let's try to build our image and see if it builds correctly. All right, the first step. Oh, look at that. It couldn't find our Alpine image. And that's because I spelled Alpine wrong. Whoops. There we go. Let's try to build again. So it's on the third step where it runs npm install to install the needed dependencies. And then the fourth step was to expose the port. And then the next step is to add our command layer. Great, so our build image was built successfully. Let's see if we can run it. So we'll do a docker run, and here's a new option we'll be learning about that we haven't used before. When you use expose, this Dockerfile command here, to expose a port, when you use this in a Dockerfile, this serves as more of a documentation for the person writing the Dockerfile to know that when you run this container, that you should expose these ports. And how you do that is you actually, like this, you add the P flag and you say the port, you say the Docker port you want to expose, and then the other port that you want to expose on your local machine. So in this case, we want to access port 3000 within the Docker container on my local machine at 3000 as well. So we do it like this. And it's worth mentioning that you can expose a larger number of very high ports if you use the capital P, but for our needs, we just want to use this lowercase p. All right, now we give the run command our image ID, and let's see if it works. Okay, it says it's listening on port 3000. If everything has gone well, we should be able to get to this from my web browser, just like we did on the local test. Okay, this looks good so far. Let's do Budapest, get weather. Look at that, it's working. And so we're accessing a Node.js application running from within our Docker container. And this was all built from the original Dockerfile that we built in some of the earlier steps. So I really just wanted to show you guys how we could put an already built application inside of a Docker container and some of the other commands that are available within the Dockerfile, and also a little bit on how to use Docker Hub. So I hope you enjoyed this video. There will be more to come. These are some of the concepts we have to grasp before we move into using Kubernetes. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you check out the next video. Thank you and bye-bye.